my god, Dad. More people keep posting on their Instagram story and they keep saying, oh my god, everything with that's going on with the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A is bad. But yesterday, didn't you say that it was good? I don't get it.
Let me tell you, in Kashmir, there's a saying, "Unke azan pron baat."
What the heck does that mean?
They literally have no idea what they are talking about. They're making this complicated issue into black and white. Please do not read that. Stay away from Instagram.
No, but they argue so much and they're so strong about it. They're just like everything's bad.
Okay, you faltu bakwas boz hai na. If you want to watch, there, put the news and you learn yourself.
Sat Sri Akal, Namaskar, and hello to all of our fellow viewers. Our topic for today's broadcast is the effect of Article 370 on the displaced group of Kashmiri Pandits. I am Anika Tiku, a 15-year-old junior at Cupertino High School.
And I'm Sandhya Tiku, a 19-year-old sophomore at UT Austin. And this is ASN News.
In lieu of the abrogation of Article 370 in August 2019, we are starting off the night discussing Article 370 and 35A. On my right is the official documentation of Article 370. The article exempts the state of Jammu and Kashmir from the laws stated in the Indian Constitution and gives the state a special status. The status permits J&K to create its own constitution and flag and limits the Indian Parliament's powers in the state to defense, external affairs, and communication.
The last part of the article dictates that it can be deleted by a presidential order as long as J&K's Constituent Assembly concurs on the deletion. The article is labeled as temporary since it's in Part 21 of the Constitution, which is defined as temporary, transitional, and special provisions. Soon after, Article 35A was added to the Constitution, which gave the J&K legislature the power to define the state's permanent residents and their specialized privileges. The state government decided that only permanent citizens could have the ability to buy land or property in the state, hold government jobs, or avail educational scholarships. These articles were put to make sure that the demographics of the state remained the same and the culture preserved.
To learn a little bit more about the history behind the addition of Article 370, let's transition to our reporter standing outside Kashmir University.
Thank you guys. This is Sonia Zuchi outside Kashmir University, and we have Padma Bhushan winning Karan Singh, son of late Maharaja Hari Singh, to talk about Article 370. Sir, any initial thoughts?
I still remember the day, October 27, 1947. I was in the house, in the room when the accession was signed.
I can't imagine. Do you remember what events caused your father to take the decision to accede to India?
When talks of partition first came around, Maharaja Hari Singh, my father, wanted to keep Kashmir independent. Back then, J&K was a Muslim-majority princely state with a Hindu ruler, bordering both India and Pakistan. My father did not want to accede to either nation, but circumstances forced his decision.
I see. Then what caused your father to finally accede to India?
Basically, as the partition-related violence spread through the new nations, the Pakistani government pressured my father to have Kashmir join Pakistan. The Pakistan government assisted the Pathan tribal militia when they invaded western Kashmir. When the militia wreaked havoc on the people, my father had to ask for India's military support. Indian authorities promised military assistance to J&K if the princely state acceded to India. My father then signed the document of accession after the UN brokered an agreement that dictated a later plebiscite would decide the final status of the state. Later, with UN Security Council support, a ceasefire line between India and Pakistan was created, which essentially partitioned Kashmir.
But then how was Article 370 finally added to the Indian Constitution?
Afterwards, my father abdicated his position as Maharaja and I joined the Indian Constituent Assembly. By 1950, Sheikh Abdullah and Nehruji added Article 370 to the Indian Constitution as a temporary provision. Then in 1954, Article 35A. Finally, in 1956, J&K created its own constitution.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Sonia. We'll be back to talk to two guests after a short commercial break.
मध्यम सरी तरंगर पकान पकान तरंगर युससिरोमुत मिलित सरी तांडव सुगर. Welcome back. Next, we have two supporters of the abrogation of Article 370, Pamposh, a Kashmir native, and Sheen, a researcher on the topic. Pamposh, as a Kashmiri Pandit who lived in Kashmir, how do you think the addition of Article 370 to the Indian Constitution affected the Kashmiri Pandits?
So, I think Article 370 didn't directly impact the Kashmiri Pandits in 1947, but instead what it did was it caused a slow build-up in the Kashmiri Muslims' mind of like a separatist mentality. The goal that Article 370 had was to find a way to maintain the cultural identity and the demographics in the Kashmir Valley. This is exactly what Article 370 achieved. With Article 370 in place, nobody from outside of Kashmir could come to live in the valley because, they just couldn't buy land or property, hold government jobs. They had no rights there, so there was no reason for them to come there. So basically, Muslims remained the majority and Pandits the minority. None of the Indian constitution even applied to Kashmir, so they were completely disconnected from India. And this disconnection just kind of festered a hate in the minds of the Muslims against Hindus till most of the Hindus just couldn't tolerate it. So we Pandits, me included, we went through a slow migration over the years, and just so many families left even before 1990. And you know what? I'll even tell you a small story of what happened in Sopore. They were trying to build a Ranbaxy factory, a pharmaceutical company there, which obviously would bring in more jobs and hire more workers. But even before the construction began, the Kashmiri government, specifically Syed Ali Shah Gilani, he just shut down the idea completely. And he just labeled it Indian expansion, and he believed that the factory would motivate outsiders from Jain to come inside and, just work in Kashmir, which is exactly what they didn't want. They were so passionate and interested in keeping Hindus as a minority in the state that they even refused to create a factory that would help, mostly employ people in the state.
Thank you, Pamposh. Now, how about you, Sheen? What's your perspective on the issue?
Actually, I didn't live or wasn't brought up in Kashmir, but I have done a lot of research, and based off my research, I think the article had an indirect effect on Hindus in Kashmir. Without the support, the Indian government, the J&K, which was, of course, naturally mostly Muslim concentrated, discriminated against Hindus and treated them very unfairly. Even before the exodus in 1990, Hindu citizens were rarely given positions of power, and other good jobs were given to Muslims over Pandits. Nobody kept the government in check and ensured citizens were treated fairly, so anything flew. Actually, based off my research, many Indian states have a percentage reservation of jobs in governments and seats in professional colleges specifically for the minority religions. But this didn't apply in J&K because Hindus in Kashmir had no representation at all.
That's actually very true. In my position as special secretary to the government, I could see firsthand that scholarships reserved for minorities were not actually practiced.
It's not
like
fair.
That. They were just given to Muslims and whoever else came along. So, there was nobody to look after us Kashmiri Pandits at all. Their rights were completely stolen from them.
Yeah.
That was a very thorough explanation. Thank you for that. Now, what has happened so far in the 1 year after the abrogation of Article 370?
So actually, J&K is no longer considered disputed territory, so Pakistan occupation will not be tolerated in the area. Even in just this 1 year, there's so much development in grape harvesting, roads built to connect villages to the city, and money allocated for further progress. One thing I can say is the process of uncovering terrorists and punishing them has been expedited. Police officers who once turned a blind eye to illegal acts are now held accountable for their actions under Indian rule. Time will show the true effect of the removal of these articles.
So if all these changes have come to J&K in just 1 year, what kind of future do you see for the Kashmir Valley?
I think Jammu and Kashmir has a lot of area to progress in. So since people can now come to the region and settle down, the industries in Kashmir can really be radically changed. With people moving into the valley with unique ideas and newer technologies, J&K's major industries will become really modernized and private investment will increase. If you take the tourism sector, investment in tourism facilities will improve infrastructure and therefore tourism and so job opportunities. It's just a nice cycle. And then the handicraft industries will see that they'll be able to import nationally, internationally even, and that'll definitely spur the Kashmir economy. Now, if we look at healthcare, we can see that world-class healthcare providers will be able to open healthcare centers in Kashmir and provide top-quality healthcare. Higher education private institutions can introduce better education to the area. And if you look at the Indian Constitution, the laws of that being applied in J&K will allow women to have better rights, LGBTQ rights, and even anti-corruption laws will be applicable to the J&K government. Basically, the overall transparency and accountability of the government will increase.
Yeah.
But I think actually more important than that is the new mentality that'll come to the Kashmir Valley. Modern ideas and thought process will really cause outdated traditional values to fade, and better education and more jobs will help steer the youth away from terrorism and violence. With people coming into J&K, there will be more Indians and Hindus in the region, so the Kashmiri Muslim separatist mindset won't exist anymore. I think this will definitely cause the hate towards Hindus from the Muslims in the region to, just be eradicated.
And I think that was a big part of, what happened in Kashmir.
Yeah, and my people, the Kashmiri Hindus, would of course be able to go back to their homeland then, and they won't have to fear discrimination or disrespect. And of course, these are long-term changes, might take 1 or 2 decades, but things for the Kashmiri Hindus may still change very soon, too. The central government's increase in control of J&K will allow minorities to receive a lot of support, and the Hindu minority there will be able to take advantage of the benefits that are reserved for them, which they haven't been able to so far.
Exactly.
The central government's oversight on the state government will prevent corrupt measures from, being tolerated like they currently are.
Yeah.
So Hindus will have more of a fair chance at having government positions or educational scholarships, and I really think my people will be able to come out of the shadows that they're in right now.
Thank you for that excellent explanation. Our last question for the night is, if Article 370 had been a temporary provision and had been removed soon after its adoption, how different do you think J&K would currently be?
Honestly, I think J&K would be a completely different place. All the development that you just discussed here, Pamposhi, would have come to the region over the decades. Kashmir would also be more diverse with people of different religions and backgrounds, and Hindus wouldn't have become an overwhelming minority. The violence and discrimination that is ensued against Hindus, or that has been ensuing these past couple of decades, would have been fizzled out much earlier, as old attitudes would have left sooner, and protection from the Indian government would have been way more effective. I'm confident the slow migration of Kashmiri Hindus before 1990 and the 1990 exodus would not have happened and would have been prevented because earlier modernization of Kashmir would have prevented terrorism from flourishing. Rather than the population of Kashmiri Hindus decreasing over the years, it would have increased. Anyone that doubts this simply has to compare the situation in J&K and Hyderabad in 1947. Both princely states were disorganized and had no modern practices. If you compare these same places in 2019, you can very clearly see the stark difference. Hyderabad has a much more thriving economy and has been industrialized, while in comparison, J&K has had little progress, which is so much more likely to change due to these new incoming changes from the removal of Article 370. Thank you guys for that wonderful discussion, and thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in tonight. Hope to see you next week. This is Anika Tiku.
And Sandhya Tiku.
And this is ASN News.